I've arrived here, Fiorano, home of Ferrari, and I'm in a cynical mood, people, because I just don't see what you do with the 720 horsepower 488, because the normal car's already got so much power it bends your face. And this is a track version, but who wants to go to a track in a car that's worth £250,000? I mean, if you ding a wheel or go through a gravel trap, it costs a fortune. So I'm wondering whether the Ferrari Special Edition, Special Series mid-engine car is just getting ahead of itself. Does the world need a 720 horsepower 488 for track use? I don't know. And then you come to Fiorano, and of course, you then drive the thing. Oh, and it explodes up the road, and you think, okay, I'll park the cynicism for a minute, let's just enjoy the car, because this thing, it's alive, it's up on its toes, it's responsive, and it's so fast, it's brutally fast. All the while it's managing the torque delivery of that monstrous turbocharged V8. And the speed around here. I've just spent the weekend racing a GT3 car. This feels twice as fast. It's really revving out as well. The torque peak is at 750 like the standard car, but there's so much less inertia, as you'll now realise from the tech part of the video, that it really does feel like it spools up quicker. It feels more normally aspirated. The tyre, grip levels are good front to rear. Interestingly, they've not gone for a super sticky Michelin. This K-rated Pilot Sport Cup 2 it's quite street in its feel. So those expecting to set stupid lap times with sticky rubber might be disappointed, but you know what? As a balance of road and track, I'm sure it's the correct decision. But for me, this is the turbocharged engine I always wish the 488 had had. I don't really feel that it's turbocharged, except the fact that now and again it releases crazy amounts of torque. At the moment I'm in CT off, so I'm traction managing myself, but if you put it in race, you just come out of a corner full beans. If you're an inexperienced driver, there's never been a Ferrari that's as helpful as this. And so within the space of 2 minutes, I've gone from cynical grumpy pants to this is rather wonderful. It does that to you though, this place and these cars. What's really interesting is that the more power these manufacturers extract from these turbocharged engines, the more the limit of the vehicle becomes the mechanical grip, the tyre. And what they end up with is a driving experience that's curiously old-fashioned, because you're managing the amount of grip that you've got at the back of the car, really. As is traditional, one must turn everything off and see what happens. Let's see what happens here. So we get on the gas and immediately it's cyber. Oh, it's predictable, it's balanced. Yeah, steering's just the right speed. Pretty mute as they are these days, but let me just let it move out a bit here. I mean, it's so much torque that even on a half throttle, the car is moving around everywhere. I mean, you're pulling gears mid-slide nonchalantly. Think of the electronics going on to manage that. This brake pedal feel, they've really gone to town on the brakes, and it does feel like a race car pedal. It's got that lovely solidity to it. And ultimately, it doesn't feel super grippy because you're always overcoming the grip with the power. It's really lovely. I love the way the engine revs out. That Inconel exhaust gives us a better sound. It's a big step up on a 488, a big step, particularly in terms of the feel. I don't care about the raw numbers, the fact that it's faster and all that other gas. It's a much nicer car to drive, primarily because of the step on in the engine for me. It's just got better response, less inertia. It feels more normally aspirated. Another trick is that on the overrun, on a downshift, the engine is producing what the engineers call greater negative torque, which was one of the best double negatives ever. Effectively, it's adding inertia. It's trying to add drag so that when you're going through a heavy brake with a downshift, everything's contributing to that braking performance and getting the weight towards the front of the car. It's a clever thing. But would you really go and fang it round a track day? This is the frustration with these cars. So many of these are going to be sitting in garages being boasted about by the owners. Yeah, I got one of those. I get the special series cars because I'm a big dog. I don't care. Go out and drive it, dude. Or dudess, whoever you may be. You can't make stuff that's this good to drive and then treat it as an inanimate object. I think they should make that a crime in Italy.
The Pista doesn't use a tweaked GTB motor. Instead, it runs the unit from the 488 Challenge race car. This means a new cooling system, new intakes and exhaust, and many internal changes too. It also means 720 horsepower and 568 foot-pounds of torque. There's a 90 kilogram weight reduction and claimed increases in downforce at both axles. Carbon fibre wheels are an option, and the latest electronic chassis aids allow the variable locking differential to communicate with the brakes to create even better direction changes. The interior is mostly 458, which means it's nearly 10 years old now, and frankly looks it. The wheel doesn't adjust quite enough, and the sheer quantity of different materials and textures makes you wonder what the Italian for hotchpotch is. But no matter, this is a car for driving.
Ferrari says this is a track car, but despite being optimised for circuit use, we know that most pieces will spend their time mincing about slowly on the public highway. So let's tell you what it's like to drive on the road. I want to dislike it, but I can't because it's very, very good. First of all, the engine. I think anyone that's driven a 488 GTB will know that thing is so close to greatness, but there's something missing at the top end, an urgency, because it's turbocharged and everything seems to sort of get very quickly to 6,500 RPM and then plateau. This one keeps going. That's for two reasons. One, lighter internals, those titanium conrods and all the other lighter bits inside from the Challenge engine really do make it spool up faster. It feels, just feels lighter, all the internals. You get the sense of lighter bits of metal moving around. And the other bit is the way they've calibrated the last few RPM before the rev limiter cuts in at about 8,000 RPM. Whereas the 488 had a soft limiter to just protect the engine from blowing itself to bits, this one's more aggressive. You can pretty much get all the way, and it doesn't sort of taper a cut. It just gets there and stops. That really helps. So there's now more of a reason to go higher in the rev range. Suspension. Well, do you know what? Ferrari's remarkably unkeen to talk about things like springs and dampers and roll bars these days. So much of what it achieves appears to be through electronics. The spring is a bit stiffer than the 488. The damper unit's the same but recalibrated to work with everything else. The diff is the same, it's electronic, but again, different calibration. And the roll bars, they're the same. Apparently, according to the engineer in charge, roll bars don't really matter these days. Yes, you need them, but they don't really matter. Amazing. What really makes the car stand out for me is the fact that the bumpy road button absorbs really quite bumpy roads. The front of the car is superb. This K2 branded Michelin Pilot Sport is amazing on the road. It must be the best street tire I've driven that has track credentials. So the front of the car is amazing. You just wing the wheel as hard and fast as you want the car turns. That is a big advantage over a GT2 RS, because the GT2 RS just can't quite match that on the road. That sort of flick it between your wrists, enjoy the Italian countryside feel, and then when you open it up, this thing is a sniff slower than a LaFerrari in a straight line. 0 to 125 miles an hour in 7.5 seconds. Say that again. 7.5 seconds. Woo! Gearbox, identical to the GTB, fast with even faster programmed gear shifts. The downshifts are hilariously quick. It almost feels like a pneumatic race gear change. Upshifts, superb, can't fault any of that. So what's wrong with it? The interior just looks old and rubbish to my eyes now. I may be wrong and it might be subjective, but there are so many different materials that looks like you've been to the haberdashery department at John Lewis and just grabbed a load of random materials and just thrown them at the car. There's just colours and textures and fabrics, and all this is all a bit old and too familiar, and yeah, I don't get it. The ergonomics are a bit crazy as well. The driving position is good, you sit low, but I can never quite get the wheel right, and this seat is meanly padded. The Manettino switch, that looks old as well. I'm ready for the next generation of Ferrari cabins, frankly. It's also quite a numb device. You know, the steering doesn't really give you much. The brake pedal with this more firmer response is good, but again, quite dead. It's a car that you feel your way into, but you have to take some leaps at times just to get there, because you don't get much reassurance from the controls. And on the road, if you turn the traction control off, this drives, and this is the really weird thing in 2018, this drives like a late 50s sports racer. What we now have are performance cars where the gap between the engine's potential and the tyre technology is ever widening. Michelin are doing a fantastic job to try and keep up, but they just can't. They just can't with these huge power and torque increases. And that means that if you turn it off, half a throttle will break traction, a third sometimes, maybe less. And it is literally like driving a Jaguar E-Type in the wet. I love it. The car dances around and you can play with it, but the speeds are quite high, and I'm not sure that in 2018 people want to see supercars coming out roundabouts sideways on the public highway. So maybe it is a Pista, maybe it does just belong on the circuit because it's so fast. That's the only place you can use it. It's entirely usable on the road. The ride's good. It's a bit noisy with that boomy in-canal exhaust, but it's got a good hi-fi. It's not that much less comfortable than a GTB, maybe, I don't know, 5-10%, who cares? You could use it every day if you wanted to. But to not use its performance would be such a shame. And there's one other thing. This and the new GT2 RS are making me wonder whether the phrase last of the normally aspirated, which is so often now applied to the values of cars that are going up stratospherically because they're the last atmospheric engines, I wonder whether these are killing that feeling, because this is so good. This engine is so fine that I'm not sure a Speciale is suddenly going to be worth loads of money, because I think this is a step beyond in just about everything it does, and it sounds good too. It revs out. So maybe the last of the normally aspirated thing might soon be over, because these turbo engines are just not only so effective, but so much fun to use. Food for thought.